Oh, yeah. I can't spend the nose. Oh, can you tell me home? Did you see it? I'm glad you stopped by. Take him to him, baby. Take him up again.
Is it KB text? So I tell you.
Oh, can you tell me who? Yeah.
Like the Bad Waters 8 o'clock news thing. I love it.
Devin, give him the fucking weather. What's going on, bro?
All sunny over here. Hey,
I missed you, brother. Thanks for coming on.
Miss you too, man.
What's been new?
Honestly, nothing much. Just living life day by day.
Yeah, tell me about that. The jazz album that you just put out. That was it covers or was it remakes of things that you had been working on?
You mean like the last EP that I did?
Yeah.
Well, that's just a bunch of old stuff that I put together from like over the years, and I do this thing called Hidden Marvels. And basically, what I do is I go through my old music library and I basically just find stuff that I'm jamming on behind closed doors, and then I'm like, okay, you know what? I just want to release it.
Yeah. So how much of like a working pile do you normally keep on your desk of songs and ideas and things that like you bounce between at one time?
Well, this current project, I have a lot of different songs. I think the last time I counted was like 25, and a lot of them really aren't even finished. They're just ideas that I have in demos. But that's just what I've been working on currently. But the entire scope of everything that I've done from like childhood to like now is like over at least 800 to 1,000 at this point.
That's awesome. And do you really feel like you have those cataloged well enough that you can reach back and find stuff from your childhood?
Oh, absolutely.
How did you do that from such a young age? How did you keep it together?
I just love the idea of albums ever since I was a kid. So I always make stuff into a record. And even if I just make single beats, they're usually titled so uniquely that I know which one they are.
Okay, cool. And it recalls very quickly for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite the book to keep in your head, yo.
Yeah.
And do you prefer writing now like in the box on a computer, or do you still write vocal in front of piano and just work from there?
I'm trying to work on that more. I've always said that I want to do like a writing trip and just do like a keyboard or a piano and just vocals and a notepad and just do it that way. But usually I have an idea of a song in my head, so my keyboard and my laptop is right there, so I have to try and like produce it to the best of my ability.
Yeah, get the entire scope of the thing down.
Right.
And as you're writing lyrical content, do you let that spin in the background, or do you kind of quiet the room, move to lyrics, come back?
A lot of the time I'll have a chorus in mind, but the verses I have to kind of like fiddle around with. And on that, I usually just try to I take the John Mayer approach where I just kind of just like just mumble things out, and then I'll move forward from there. And if I hear words that kind of stick, like Alison Goldfrapp, I'll just put them in that slot.
Nice. And then this is just like doing scratch vocals over the track that you've laid out, and you just kind of pick out those words and let them.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that I have a new mic now and I can do that, and it doesn't sound like chicken scratch.
I don't think any of your stuff sounds like chicken scratch. I think like, you have a prolificness of looking around at what's available and finishing it with those things in mind. Like, as I was doing this last EP and I reached out for some mix notes, like, there's such a commonality amongst musicians of, like, I need this to do that. And it's just not the truth. It's like, if you hear it, it is your job to pull it out of the ether however the fuck you can do it.
Yeah.
And you're such a beautiful maniac in that regard. Like, I'll never forget you telling me about making a kick drum out of slapping your thigh, and it sounds great. But how do you kind of rank what you would actually spend money on to make an improvement in the studio, like a new microphone, versus what you're just going to roll with and make happen?
I think that's more of a mental thing for me, because this next record that I've been working on, not just in terms of my music, but I'm just working on changing my life in general and the things I say yes to and no to, and how confident I feel in my day-to-day life. And I realized on this next project, I want to actually make stuff that feels professional rather than, just. I believe in, like Roshi Murphy said, that truly creative people can work with whatever they have to the best of their ability. And I've done that for so long, but at the same time, I also think that there's also room to grow. And that's why I wanted to buy new equipment for this record and new instruments and really experiment and see what I was capable of in a new sort of sonic environment rather than just using the same old stuff I've been using since like literally elementary school.
But that's so fascinating to me because when I think of quote unquote professional production, what I'm looking for in those moments is to delegate well. Like, I don't want to be the one to mix and master. I don't want to be the engineer saying that this is good enough. To pay someone for the professional affirmation execution is what I see as that professional kind of vibe, versus what you're talking about is just including new things in the palette, giving yourself new items to play with. Does that independence of making your imagination into reality, is that something you really hold on to, that you like to do these projects pretty much on your own as the only years on it?
I really do enjoy having my privacy and allowing myself to truly have the creative freedom to pursue the idea that I want. But that phone toss was funny.
I was like, that's going to be a distraction. I need to get this out of my face.
But basically, I want to invite more people into the fold, slowly but surely. Eventually, especially if I'm trying to be a businessman here, I have to learn how to, like work and pull people into the fold.
For sure.
And it's not that I can't do that. It's just that I'm trying to work my way up to that. And again, more reasons why I'm doing this record is so I can get out of my comfort zone and start doing that and inviting my friends over to the studio, like kind of like you do with me and like all of the other friends, like Nick and John and all of that.
Yeah. Well, I'm very fortunate that I was blessed with space to do so, and I've been able to make things happen because of that. And everyone is looking at their stack of equipment, their Rolodex of players, and the ideas sitting in their head, and they're trying to figure out how to bring the means to an end. And one thing that I think you're additionally prolific at is taking other people's ideas and starting to flesh out the most ambiguous things to them, like especially with our experience with TL and whatnot. When it comes to the chordal opportunities that you have on keys versus the 10 same guitar phrases that someone like myself kind of falls into, you just have a very wide spectrum of music to pull from. And I feel like that makes you a very particular resource. But how did you kind of hone the skill of helping other people find their ideas?
I think just becoming a good listener, from having a large sort of music taste to also just being a Libra and wanting to be there for everybody.
Yeah.
I kind of started learning, that sort of I guess you can call it an empathetic way of communicating with people. And so in situations like Tommy, we talked about how, especially through playing through Prime and also just our conversations, we talked about how she loves musical theater. We talked about how she loves country and singer-songwriter music, and all of that, plus the stories that she told me about the songs that she was writing. It kind of informs into what goes into the music. Even with somebody like Lauren, at least last night, we just had a rehearsal, and so we have the specific vision for what we're doing for the show on Saturday, and we were just tossing around ideas, and then all of a sudden, it's like that leader part in me wants to be you're overstepping your bounds, but you gotta go. And so I will say something, and then all of a sudden, the silence in the room is just wow, we finally found the idea we're looking for. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
I think it's just really listening and honing into who you're working with.
Yeah, and I think also, like you just said, choosing your spot to intervene when you feel like things are either going off the rail or they're just close enough to clicking into place. Lauren Elise has something very particular about not just her music, but I was playing Low Spark in OTR the other day, and she walked in, and just the energy of that woman, I was overwhelmed by her presence, and I was what do you think makes someone into that? Is that personal presentation, or do you think that's energy that's bestowed on someone when they're born, or what do you think?
That's actually a good question. I think honestly, that's kind of feeling comfortable within oneself. I know for sure when I feel good in a space, I'm not really changing anything. Also, when you take care of yourself, because I know that she's one of those people where, like everybody is like on a cleanse and, working out and doing the best that they can. Not that they're just like going ham at it every single day, but they're doing what makes them feel good.
Yeah.
And that's what probably carries over into that, makes that confident air.
Well, and you put up a thing on your Instagram the other day of just you sitting by the waterfront and just talking about, feeling whole in that moment. And when people share those things, you're right. Sometimes it feels forced or fickle. And I had said to someone the other day, like, if there's a day that you don't want to do something, but it's on your to-do list and you still execute, it does not mean that that day is less. Sometimes it's worth more because you are willing to put yourself in uncomfortable positions. Like if you're doing push-ups and you don't want to do them, does that make them less valuable to you? No, not at all. But you still need to work on the perspective around these things that you do for your self-treatment and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating thing to watch someone kind of come into themselves in that way and start to open up their life to what they need. As you've been on that journey, has there been anything that's been a more potent habit for you that you've incorporated recently?
Just making sure that when I move from a heart space. I have a history of kind of being, and it's going to turn into a therapy moment, but I have a history of kind of being just like a people pleaser and constantly saying yes to things that, sounds good on paper, but it's not necessarily the life that I want to live. And so I think coming into this year, especially having such a whirlwind year with working so hard, like literally last year, I want to say probably August or October to December, it was like week, gig, week, gig. And it was like, okay, I can't do that. And it was mostly because I was saying yes to things that I'm just like, okay, well, I need a paycheck. And that's not the way any musician should live. It's a sad fact that a lot of people feel that they have to live that way. But what I've been going through right now is a change in perspective of if it's not really a hell yes, then I can't really dedicate myself to it.
And when you find yourself with those situations, do you say no point blank, or do you talk to artists and bands about what would make it a hell yes to you?
That's actually a good question, because a lot of the time at this point, I've just been practicing saying no, but that's actually a really good point, because now that you bring that up, I do feel like a lot of people would feel a lot more comfortable if people would start saying, what their terms and conditions are and what makes them feel good and what's good about a situation. And sometimes, people don't, necessarily want excuses or to just have a conversation. They just want to hear no, which is fine. Mm-hmm. But that would be awesome for people to do that more, and especially for me to do that more.
I think we're all clunky in expressing ourselves at points in time, especially when you feel like you're within that moment time frame where you need to respond. Yeah. But there's something really beautiful about those conversations and the things that you learn about yourself, about what people need from you and what you have to offer people. And sometimes, a flat no is the best way to get out and not have to describe those things to someone that's not gonna get it. But then sometimes even it feels like bartering in some ways, but to have that back and forth helps band leaders and artists alike start to hone in what they're actually providing.
Right.
And if you care about the musicians in your life, like many people like Lauren Elise and myself are really trying to, and yourself included, and Sam and all these beautiful musicians, that sometimes you're part of someone's team and sometimes you're leading that team, and it's a very interchangeable hat. But you need to find out what people value in that experience. Like Kevin McClellan once said it really well to me, of a good gig needs three things. Well, two of three things: good bread, good hang, good music. He's like, Norm, if I can get 2 out of 3, I'll take the gig. If you get 3 for 3, that's excellent. But there's leverage in people's skill sets that sometimes doesn't get expressed. Someone calls Dev Marvelous for a studio session or a live performance. It's not about having someone play keys. It's about having Dev fucking Marvelous playing keys. So people learning how to eloquently value themselves and other people's projects is such a great way for a scene to feel lively and feel professional.
Completely. Yeah. I think one thing that I do love about playing in such a creative community, in such a great community such as this one, especially here in Cincinnati, is like everybody is so freaking talented. Like we have so many amazing people. And I was talking to one of my friends, Brandy LaSherwell, who plays Billie Holiday and Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill with me. We were talking about when we started rehearsals, we know like everybody in this scene. How come we've just met, right? Like we know Heather Hale, we know all of these people like on Laurel and Elise and all of this stuff, and so our circles are hilariously big, but the little nucleuses inside of that are just like, how have we not combined yet? So
Yeah. Well, it's odd the way that venues and shows and whatnot kind of play into that ever-changing wheel, but it's a much bigger scene that we give it credit for being.
True.
And some of that, it's hard to say what shows are worth it and what shows are not. But at the end of the day, we all need to focus on the listener populace feeling more fulfilled by the endeavors they make to participate in the musical community that's around them. And you and I can be listeners as much as we can be artists. And I'll always admit that I'm probably one of the worst about going out to see a show because most of the time I'm trying to play that night of the week.
Yeah.
But if you don't take those opportunities to steep in the water that someone else has prepared for you, you don't get the full flavor of this whole scene at one time,
Yeah. And I love that my life at this point, I can now maintain a stable living and do what I love. And also I'm starting to support local artists that I love. And I'm getting to see my friends live. I'm getting to see other people that I've admired for years live. They just come to the city and on tour and I just go see them. So that's something that's really, really been special for me right now.
Yeah. As you've kind of had some space from a really heavy touring chapter of your life, do you think that's something you value going into the future? Or do you like staying within a certain radius of your home?
I've been thinking about it, and I know my higher self wants to tour. And I do see myself doing like productions and helming like artistic direction and musical direction for tours and stuff like that, either for me or for somebody else. I'm not sure. Mostly for me. But for right now, I'm really just comfortable being in a studio space, being in a home space. I know eventually as I grow as a musician, I expect that hopefully as I take changes, my perspective on tour will change, and hopefully the way I can tour will change too.
Yeah. Well, it's so different when you're the one planning it versus you're the one that's going along for it. And you can kind of set up the standards and regiment that you need for your own productivity. Like, I feel like in the last year, I've really had a tough learning experience of what I thought other people wanted when we're on the road versus what I wanted. The compromises that happened, and finding out that I was so far towards the middle of that compromise that no one was happy. And you almost need to prioritize yourself to be at that 100% capacity so that when other people ask things of you, you have 100% to give, rather than anticipating someone else's needs, leaving yourself at 60%. And then when it comes to them asking for what they really need, it sounds like they're asking for more, and they're not.
Right.
It's such a tough balance, though, when you're working with people that they're not just musicians. They have their whole life around them. So many folks in the recipe are wonderful parents, wonderful spouses, partners, employees of other businesses. It's hard to encompass everything that's on someone else's plate when they step into your life and agree to be there for weeks on end, or 4 days, or even 24 hours. What do you think are the biggest priorities for you when it comes time for Dev Marvelous being on the road, promoting this material? Like, what would be the ideal situation?
I know for sure and it's just my mind, I need time to adapt to certain situations, because a lot of the time I've just realized that my brain moves, as much as it moves fast in certain areas, it moves slower in other areas. So in a space such as touring, when it's such a close-knit space and you're living in a suitcase, you need to have some type of stability and some type of, at least comfort, some type of it. So I want to at least make sure, and especially because I'm working on, putting bands together and experimenting with that front. So I want to make sure that, the schedule is decent so that we're not overworking ourselves. And I want to make sure that the entire environment is an open environment so that we can communicate our needs to each other. And we can also, separate and convene when we need to.
I think that's such a hard learned fact of touring. It's like sitting in a van with your headphones in is not privacy.
Right.
It's a little bit of a reclusive state that can help fulfill a different need of silence to the rest of the world and just listening into whatever you want to listen into. But what would you say is like a healthy gigging kind of schedule when you're on the road? Like, do you like 2 days on, 1 day off?
I've talked about this with other people. So my ideal plan is one, travel, get there. If we have time, everybody can do what they need to do. If they want to sightsee, they can sightsee. If they want to just sit in the room, hotel room or whatever, they can do that. Day two, still there. We do the show. Everything is like sound check. We dedicate it to show, and then that's it. If we leave that night, we can travel to the next city, sleep in the van or en route, or we can just sleep in the hotel and then go.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that it needs to be, like vacation, but I do think that we need like space to delegate to, okay, so we're going to rest today and then we're going to work today. You know what I mean?
I think any drive over 4 hours has officially become work to me.
Right.
And I have a hard time checking into, if you drive 6 to 8 hours, get out, it's time to load. It's time to sound check. Mm-hmm. It's time to play. It's time to get back in the car. It's such a whirlwind that doesn't feel like you can get any of the juice for the squeeze that you're putting in.
Right. And that's coming from people who don't have roadies, right?
Yes.
Like you're doing a lot of the driving yourself, or a lot of the recipe does driving themselves. And see me, hopefully when I get to the point where I can, like tour and do like other things, hopefully I'm praying to God that I will be in a situation where I can actually like pay people to actually be in that mode. And I realize that, driving and being, a roadie is still a lot of hard work and a lot of planning.
Yeah.
But I want to make sure that still, even in that work, they have, time to themselves and times to actually like recharge.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's so interesting you say that, because we're watching a change in the world with the monoliths that dominate our industry, like Taylor, who prioritize the betterment of people from the bottom up, really. The semi-truck driver bonus seems like such a public affairs ordeal, but if that happened behind closed doors, it would have the same intention of, this show doesn't pop up anywhere. That's for fucking sure. Not when you're putting up that kind of stage and those kind of boards and whatnot.
Right.
And for artists that are at yours and I's scale right now, sometimes you have to get so skinny to make things ideal. And I found myself saying no to a lot more band gigs and yes to a lot more solo gigs because it's easier to finagle and whatnot. And for someone like yourself to fly into the Boston area and there's a house piano, is that good enough? Maybe on some gigs it is. But on other gigs, does it feel right to not be playing your board that you've put all your time and tone into? No. Does it feel right to hand someone a chart and say play music? It's like, that doesn't cut it either. So defining what you want from your artistic endeavors is such a tough thing, and the compromises creep up on you so much quicker than you'd imagine. Yeah. It's a tough game to be out there and trying to financially fulfill your dream career, knowing that people are paying less and less for entertainment overall.
Yeah.
As someone that puts out a lot of music, how do you feel about where the world sits with streaming and what you feel like is the value of your product?
I have always been a huge fan of physical media, but I realized that things like streaming has kind of diminished that over the years. I'd like to still
For you,
think
it's
that,
diminished it?
Well, I just think that overall, it's just kind of like a lot of people don't really buy CDs unless they're from somebody that they like truly like love, and this is like a homespun artist, and they have like a merch table, and they're like, okay, I gotta get that. That's like a collector's item at this point. But a lot of the time, I think that, people say that touring is, the main way that people make their money and main way that people get their gigs. I would love to see changes in the streaming industry personally, but I realize that there's, especially with this writer strike going on, there's probably going to be a huge domino effect with that, and people are going to start saying, you know what, if we have to make changes over here, we got to make changes over here.
Yeah. And what do you think about exclusivity to certain streaming platforms that are better rewarded than others, like exclusivity with your content and where it lays?
That I can't really speak on too much, because the only time that I can think about being exclusive is eventually I also, with my company, I want to be that sort of company that like makes content for themselves and offers it to the people, but they also, you know, have it in Spotify. They sell, you know, movies to theaters. They have television on all their channels and other things like that. But I want to offer people something specifically with our, you know, products firsthand, where it's like, if you support us on this platform, right, you know you're getting something special. You're getting extra things that you can't find anywhere else, you know?
Yeah, so it's like the bulk of the content needs to be widespread, but you can add exclusive hooks to try to pull people to places that are more advantageous than others.
Yeah, and I think that audiences really appreciate that, because it's not run of the mill, especially when it comes to somebody who is like, you know, you have something special to offer, then you can give that to people almost, I don't want to say overflowingly, but for lack of a better word, just more freely to people. And people want to see, you know, behind the scenes content. They want to support things straight from the source. That's why we have like farmers markets and shit like that. You know what I mean?
So do you think Patreon and things like that are the right funnel for that kind of content, where it's paying directly to content creators? Or do you think it's something like Tidal has significantly higher payouts to individual artists for individual streams than any of the other monoliths in streaming?
I think it's a mixture of both, because we have, you know, Patreon, Bandcamp, all that sort of stuff, where people can tip and pay artists as they choose and what they're rightfully deserved of. But we also have these companies that are actually making strides to pay musicians what they're worth, or at least more of what they're worth.
Yeah.
So I think it's a balance between both, because I honestly think that you can have both and still have a really booming artistic world out there.
Yeah. I think there's a deterrence from the lack of profit incentive that you have from posting content. Like when I finish an EP and I think, how much did I spend on making this versus how much can I actually recoup within a reasonable amount of time? Most of the time that margin is wide and distracting and painful in some ways. And the same thing goes for other types of video content, where you pay the best videographer you can find for a music video, and what you really needed was 15 videos to get that point across. So the demand for consumption that's platformed and maybe lost in the ether, the way that you and I both do what we can for the short form, for TikTok and for Reels and Shorts, wherever you want to find it. If you post and miss, it's not like you grab that again and send it back out. It's just lost.
Yeah.
And the value of your time within that is very it's not nominal by nature, but you can put a number on that time, and you can start to feel the ship sinking underneath you, you know?
Yeah. And I think that one thing for me, especially when it comes to posting these days, I really so hard just want to pivot back to the old days of Instagram, where you just post a photo just because you wanted to post it and not because you're trying to be like a self-managerial boss or something like that. Because TikTok, if you see my TikTok versus my Instagram, it's polar opposites.
Really?
My Instagram is more like ads. Like I literally have Verve X Marvelous, which is my remix series that everybody should check out. Thank you.
So is that the jazz remix series?
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to, because I had seen that and I was kind of...
Oh, yeah.
Tell me a little more about that project. I'm sorry.
Well, Verve X Marvelous is this project that I have that's based on a series called Verve Remixed. Verve Records years ago put out a series of albums called Verve Remixed, and long story short, it just changed my life as a kid. It introduced me to people like Thievery Corporation, Mark DeClive Lowe, so many amazing new jazz and electronic lounge acts and producers. And even just dominoing from that, Jay Dilla, Daft Punk, all of these people that were introduced to my life all because of this random niche album that was released and I saw it on iTunes.
Yeah. Jay Dilla is the one who does that Beach Boys remake that you showed me.
Well, it's Bullion, but he does it in the style of Jay Dilla.
Oh, that's fucking weird.
Right?
Complicated.
Yep, exactly.
We take many a turn.
Exactly. But I basically, and Verve Records, for those who don't know, is a huge jazz label. They worked with Ella Fitzgerald. Norman Granz started it, I want to say, like 1956. And so Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Nina Simone, Mel Torme, Russ Montgomery, so many jazz artists. And Dolly Alden Kaplan, when she was working at Verve, well, she's still working at Verve, she was going to like all these music festivals, right? And she saw these DJs DJ sets, and they would remix in live time jazz artists over a house beat. And so she was like, why don't we just make a record of this? And so that's what Verve Remix came from. And so I've been doing this series as a tribute to that, and as a way of connecting both to my inner child and also just doing stuff that just makes me happy,
That's super cool. The other day, we got the DJ battles going on down at the Tin Roof right now. I think it's like a 6 or 7 week, competition where you're having 4 or 5 DJs a night, and they're just going at it, and you get a 10-minute slot.
Yeah.
And they had a featured act, and it was this guy named DJ Ease. And actually, now that I say it, I don't think this came from his set. I think it came from someone earlier in the night. But I think it was a part of I Want You Back that they had sampled maybe just like a bar. And one thing I love about DJs is sometimes they do things that are really oddly musical and dissonant, and they have a lot of tension that they're going to relieve without that piece of material. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that when I go to an event like that, it takes me out of our normal musical background of, oh, he's out of the key.
Right.
It's like, he doesn't give a fuck, so why should I? I'm just going to let this guy fly with it.
Mm-hmm.
And in those moments of dissonance and consonance are so accentuated in the DJ world, it's like, maybe I need to take a lesson from there. Maybe I need some more crunch, something a little angrier.
Something a little crunchy. I think that there's one thing about DJs that's really, really cool is that and this also kind of spills into, before I even watch Glee, like mashups. Just the simple fact that 2 songs can exist in the same universe or even can sound the same, because there's only so much you can do under the sun with music. But that's part of the reason why I love DJs and why I love house culture so much and just club culture in general, is that there's such a right of way of what you can do, kind of like jazz, because jazz is improvisational. DJs are improvisational. Mm-hmm. And the fact that those 2 worlds can collide and make something really cool is awesome to me.
At what point in a jazz musician's life do you think people really learn to hone in on dissonance and stretching the box just to relieve, to come back to it?
I think it's just kind of like, I was talking about this in my journal last night, actually, because we have this natural tendency to, especially people who want to lead and who want to, create, we kind of have to blaze paths, and a lot of that is just trial and error. And so when you find harmonies that are dissonant, when you find things that are weird and crunchy, that's kind of like, I imagine it as being like a caveman is finding something to cook over a fire or something and being like, oh, dang, this is good. Or like, oh, this is good. Dead.
That was poison,
right?
baby.
Exactly. So you kind of have to just learn by trial and error. And I think that's the fun thing about making music and being creative, is that you can try a bunch of different things. And even if it doesn't work, at least you tried it.
Yeah. Well, I feel more comfortable with intentional dissonance when it's based in the groove, when
Right.
it's just like something that accentuates, and I know it's out, but it's such a quick standpoint of here gone,
Mm-hmm.
and it pushes us forward. Versus when I hear someone like yourself or Jamarco or the beautiful Josh Jessen taking a solo that's intentionally dissonant, there's almost like there's a layout here. There's a game plan that's going on. It's like, and I'm going to plant a distraction over here, trying to pull your mind away, knowing that I'm going to land somewhere.
Yeah.
Do you normally know where you're going to land when you start to experiment out of the box?
I have an idea, but usually on the fly, where it goes, nobody knows.
Okay, cool.
So a lot of the time when I do personally, dissonant stuff or funky random stuff that's just like, huh, where'd that come from? A lot of the time it's, how could I put this? It's more so of really just knowing that it's kind of like, okay, so you know how you have like a certain vocabulary and you have like thesauruses and dictionaries and stuff like that. You can have a sentence that you want to say, and then you throw in this like dissonant adjective or whatever. And so that you have this vocabulary of stuff that you know of, like, this is crunchy, but I want this to lead to somewhere else. It's kind of like adding something to a sentence. So it's not accidental when you know what you're doing with it. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm not explaining it right.
Give it another shot, because I think I know what you're saying, but I'd rather not repeat. I'd rather hear from you.
It's really just when you're doing stuff like that, you're going along with it, and then all of a sudden it's like, I kind of want to play with it, twist it, make it beautiful, but make it like weird, and then move to like a different thing. It's kind of like knowing where a story is going, but it's like a plot twist or something like that. You know what I mean?
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like I've defined the beginning and the end, but I'm gonna need to make this caveat here just for the sake of for interest and whatnot.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that someone like yourself that started playing so young, you started playing around 3 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And we've talked about like there's a threshold of language that's going on at that age where you're learning to speak and you're learning to play simultaneously. So there's a part of the instrument that's in your vocab in a different way than most of us that learned once we were fully speaking human beings. And there's so much lyrically that feels obvious, whether it's wordplay of just like a double entendre or what do you call it when a word is like here and here? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like those kind of bits of nuance can be done musically, but you need to have the academic know-how to make it happen. And those kind of like false handouts or something I'm trying to figure out in music. I feel like it's almost like when you do a 5 of 5. It's like, I'm going to make you anticipate something. I'm going to drag you here, but it's really not that because we're back here again, you know?
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's stuff that you found through being taught, or was that things that your ear kind of led you to?
There's a lot of things where when I first started playing piano, I just would just play every day. And then I listened to a lot of, Herbie Hancock and Joe Sample growing up. And so at like 5 years old, I would sit at the piano and all of a sudden I would just futz around. And then next thing you know, boom! Oh wow, that's that harmony that Herbie Hancock had on that like that 1 second 23-minute mark of that song, and then I would just like play it in like every key. So I kind of like Google University through my memory a lot of the language that I used now. So when I went to college, it was kind of like I know it, but I don't know the name of it. Yeah. And still to this day, it's like I graduated, but it's like I still just use my memory. I don't really call it anything.
That's so fascinating. And that type of listening at that young of an age it's a lesson you can't get taught later in life. Who really taught you how to listen like that?
I think my mom, she really shaped a lot of my music taste. And then my uncle who taught me how to play, he was a church organist. God rest his soul. He would have been like in his 60s now. But he taught me, sheet music, and I kind of also learned gospel music from him also, because we also did a lot of hymnal work in our piano practice. So through that, I garnered a lot of like knowledge of taste and ability, like playing ability through those situations with both my mom and my uncle,
Organ is such an odd place for a kid to start. And one thing I never really appreciate about a classic organ is how staccato the instrument can be, that percussive aspect of it, but also the fact that like on most, like on a real pipe organ, there's no sustain, right? There's no way. Yeah. The way that teaches you to play amongst 10 fingers is pretty disturbing to me. Like learning how you make movements while holding the one or whatever you want to do to play underneath of it. do you feel like that is a superior starting point for a young keyboard player than a traditional piano?
I wish I had actually taken organ, because when he was alive, we were always like, "We got to teach Dev how to play organ. You got to teach Dev how to play organ," and so it never really happened to me. But if you're a kid that's learning how to both pedal with feet and then do keys, like 2 keyboards worth of stuff, and do like effects and that's like major.
Yeah.
That's kind of like that kid Miles on TikTok where he's like playing every instrument. I'm like, he's literally in Electric Lady Studios. I'm like, what is this kid? Where did he come from?
Well, I guess that's the internet's opportunity. The kids who, like you said, you kind of Google University going on as a young kid without it. These kids now have it, and when properly implemented, sky's the limit. I mean, they could be there by 11, where most people would take until 60 to find the right mentors to give them that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But for guitar players, I've always heard that you start on acoustic and you move to electric, because then things are going to be easier. You need to deal with the roughest version of the instrument to get down the natural facility of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like on organ you have that same rigid, unforgiving aspect. But I never really thought about the effects that came along with an instrument that at that point in time nothing else was like it. You know, before they have is it the Mellotron that the Beatles used? Where like they thought it was going to put every good musician out of a job. It's like, no, this is just a different way of getting there.
Right.
But the organ had this this predicating kind of opportunity to kind of sound like a flute, not really, but like it sounds different. And then think that you have 3 keyboards, one underfoot and one on top. Is that just for ease of use of getting between notes and whatnot, or was that for the sake of having different affected voices?
For what I understand, the 2 keyboards up top, they're like kind of like a lower octave and a higher octave, and you can also control them to do different drawbars and different, effects. One can be more fluty and one can be a bit more like mellow.
Yeah.
And then the pedals on the bass, well, they're bass pedals. You can use that, and a lot of like jazz organists back in the day, like Jimmy Smith, they would use that to keep time, almost like an upright bass.
Fascinating. So are they walking lines and keeping time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, that's such a mind fuck. I
Yeah,
never
it's
understood
wild.
that about organ trios, is that this guy has so much sonic reach going on that's why the guitar player's only playing one note. Get out of his fucking way. Move.
Exactly.
God damn it. How do the drawbars work on an organ?
It's kind of like a EQ, and that's the best I can explain it.
Okay.
'Cause I never really got into like organ in detail, so I only know through experimenting with GarageBand and Native Instruments.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like left is lowest and then right is highest, and so like you have like, I know there's an 8 with an apostrophe. I don't know what the apostrophe is for.
Yeah. But is that like your one accentuated harmonically on the top octave, the way that we would think about in like a traditional theory?
Yeah, it's kind of like voluming certain octaves and certain harmonies to go along with it, and also fine-tuning the sonic range that you want the instrument to be in. If you want it to be more middle, you would just pull out more middle things. If you want it to have a bit more of a boom or a low end, you would pull out the lower ones.
I always thought it was like the natural harmonics that you get within the instrument. Like if you if you play a G chord on a guitar, there are certain things going on sonically in the space that you're not physically demanding of the instrument. It's just happening because of the sonic interaction. And I thought it was kind of opening itself up to breathe. I mean, if you floor all those fucking things, it's as thick and rich as she can be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when you have like the third options on there, like, is that like a traditional major, minor, third, depending on what you're doing? Or is it just like
third, like the percussion things on the...
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
That's always confused me of how you anticipate how those you're going to interact with the note that you're playing, It's almost like playing with the delay pedal on a guitar. Until you've done it enough that you can anticipate how you go from plectrum to note to what that's going to do with the tail, it just doesn't make much sense,
Yeah. And I think one thing, at least with percussion on organs, is that kind of, it's... If you've ever listened to, what is it, Crystal Waters, Homeless Woman, or like any house track, there's a lot of like harmonics and percussion on those organs that they use in house music. And so there's a part of the organ where it's like, yes, it sounds like there's a fifth above it, but there's also the percussion where it's like the initial hit sounds like a third above the instrument. So it's kind of like the percussion stays less longer than the rest of the drawbars do. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Say that one more. The percussion of the note being hit.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like if you strike a marimba or a vibraphone and you go ting, that initial hit is like a hammer or like a hammer on a string on a piano. That will go ping, and then the drawbars can kind of affect what sound emanates harmonically in a way or sonically as you continue to hold the note. You know what I mean?
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's like it is the carry. It's like the longer form manipulation of it, almost like a channel strip would be. Like what's happening at the end of the chain. Do we have that upper octave singing hard, or are we going to slowly fade that bitch out?
Yeah, yeah. And one of my favorite uses, I think, of drawbars is Curtis Mayfield's Little Child Wonder Wild at the beginning of Superfly. Like, it's just disgusting. I love it.
that album's changed my life, and Jason happens to know the guitar player from that album.
Wow.
And I've been calling this guy. I've been harassing this older gentleman about coming on the show, and he keeps like reaching out to Jason, like, I'm not gonna do it, man. So, I forget this gentleman's name, but I'll find you, bro. As a strange caveat, I bought this children's keyboard for my nieces. It's the most early bought Christmas gift I've ever ventured into.
It's cute.
I just wanted you to turn it on and play something nasty on it and tell me if it's a garbage piece or if it's decent.
I mean, it looks awesome, but
For a little cork, yeah. Do me a favor,
you
pull
never
that
know.
thing closer to the mic just so we can get a little something with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I would have killed to have this as a child.
It has a decent action, it feels like. A nice polyphonic feel.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like Schroeder at all. I used to have a toy piano, and it was like a real toy piano, but it would like clink, and sometimes it would just feel weird. This feels like a keyboard. This is like silk.
Yeah. How do you describe that key size? Like on guitars, you say like a 3/4 scale. Is that a 3/4 scale key bed, or just like a normal MIDI keyboard feel like that to you?
Yeah, the little keyboard that I have at home that I use for a lot of my stuff when I'm gigging and I have to be on the road a lot, it's basically that size. But the keys on that keyboard feel less good than that. And especially for a kid with like small fingers that aren't like humongous like mine, I bet that's like heaven.
Well, hopefully it's enough to intrigue, and then there's a real piano close enough to these kids that they'll take on to it. But
Yeah.
you know, everything ever since you and I had talked about the age that you had started at, and Nick Meehan is in that same category of around 3 is a really special time in a kid's life. And I don't recall much from age 3. Honestly, I don't recall much from anything before 11 or 12.
Right. Yeah.
It just feels like a different life that you lived. But what you do in that time in terms of honing your skills and crafts that are going to carry you through this life is so much more valuable than we give it credit for. And assuming that all kids need the same K through 8 experience is so ridiculous, because I don't remember any of that garbage besides the basics that I needed to do what I would eventually do.
Exactly.
As someone that really spent those formative years on your instrument, what do you think is the most important quality to get?
Quality as in just
What's the best thing you get from the practice at that age?
just really the exploration of it and truly having the joy of the instrument. Because there's a lot of people where you have stuff like Youth Performing Arts School, where I went, shout out to Manuel, and you have kids that are massively talented, but their parents made them pick up the instrument because it would make them more well-rounded.
Yeah.
And then you have people like me that just have, you know, a natural affinity for the instrument because they've been playing it for so long. And so it would be a really weird situation in classes when my teacher would try to, you know, embrace the exploration and the joy of the instrument. And a lot of these kids have like freaking algebra, chemistry, homework. They're just doing this for a grade, to be honest, and to make their parents happy. And then you would have me on the corner pocket of that. It's receiving a lot of like the why aren't you kids into it like we are? And then and it's like, but I'm trying. everything I thought I was. Yeah. So I think a lot of the time those formative years really help bring forward just the joy of playing and the joy of exploring music and creating in general. Like when I was a kid, I still have a few little tiny documents of songs that I would write. And I had no filter. Even listening to D-Tone stuff back in the day when I was in like middle school and high school, I had no filter. I just put music into my laptop and made it.
Yeah.
And even lyrically, I just wrote stuff. And I'm trying to get back to that place now where it's not an ego control and you can just freely go. And I think that when you're a kid and you start that gifted at such a young age, that passion kind of still stays there. You just have to continue to hone it as you get older.
Yeah. Just like you said there, every year that you live on this earth brings a little bit more of an ego of this is who I am. You think you're the culmination of all experiences lived up to this point. And the truth is, like, you're just here now. You know, you could steer with all that experience in mind, but it has nothing to do with who you are or what's to come next. And I think there's still a lot of kids out there that don't have the whimsical, free joy of self-discovery on their instrument because of, without a better way to put it, bad teachers. And I think being a good teacher is a way harder thing than we ever give it credit for.
Absolutely.
Like if I was told right now to sit down with a kid on guitar, I would have no fucking idea of where to make them happiest.
Same.
But the other day, I got this kid's drum set over there for my nephews for Christmas last year. And sometimes it's pulling teeth to make them sit down on that. And I'm like, what am I doing? What am I prodding at if they don't want to? But
tell me, what did I do it for?
Yeah.
I thought you did it for me, Mama.
What is the movie you're quoting there?
It's Gypsy.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have such a deep book of movie quotes.
Yes.
M is similar to that, where like M will quote a sitcom that I've never seen, but like she's still in the sitcom when I'm trying to bring her back. I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, well, lady, you know.
Yep. There's so many people over my life. It's just like I will say something from my childhood that I think is just general knowledge, and then it's like, okay,
fucking crickets.
Yep.
That's interesting though, because you weren't a theater kid that was in plays, correct? You were a theater kid that loved.
Yeah, I just loved musical theater. I loved musicals, and then when I found out you could see musicals live, I was like, oh, bitch. So when Broadway was a thing for me, that was just amazing. And it's funny because we talk about, high school and things that we loved and things that we were trying to hone in on. I really kind of limited myself to just music, but I still loved musical theater. Like Sondheim is one of my favorite composers of all time. I went through such a huge Sondheim binge when I was in high school. It was insane. And I wanted to hang out with a lot of the musical theater kids at my school, but a lot of them kind of, except for maybe a few that I could, latch onto and we were like close friends. A lot of them kind of didn't really allow me to come into the fold, so I felt weird for liking what I liked at that time. But yeah, musicals, movies, all of that stuff. That's my golden.
Yeah. Well, I feel
area.
like the person behind the bench is a very subliminal character in the world of musical theater. But you also have this ability to embody characters. And for a kid that didn't necessarily do that on the stage, where'd you find that place in your life?
Just being a campy little kid performing in front of mirrors and trying on his mom's high heels and walking on his tiptoes because he wanted to be in high heels. You know?
How'd you do in high heels?
I'm good. I still need to practice more because I don't wear them a lot nowadays.
Yeah.
I want to get to a point to where I can kind of pull a Phyllis Hyman on stage and be like, okay, I'll come out in my heels. All right, we're friends. We know each other, right? Good. I can take my heels off and do that. But
you would crush a pair of heels, especially on the way out to a bench. The big announcement.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dev Marvelous.
That's the best part. To bring the heels on.
Yeah, and then to kick them off after is just like people understand that we've stepped into a very new territory.
Mm-hmm.
How does a piano pedal feel underfoot barefoot? You like that? Or is it Sounds gross.
I like it better than heels because
Okay.
I tried pedaling in heels and it's not fun.
Seems fucking impossible. You have
Yeah.
a 45-degree push. You're gonna get shin splints.
Right? My friend Desiree, who lives in Colorado, she has performed in like heels and like boots heels, and I'm just like, you're pedaling in boots heels, go off, sis.
You almost need to side foot that, I'd imagine. It's like you put the heel and then you turn the ankle, so it's almost on a 45 to press that kind of thing. I've had a very interesting experience with, with my solo gig. I just do the looper stuff for the most part. And sometimes those buttons are more evasive than other times, depending on the shoe. And the closest thing I would have to a heel is a set of cowboy boots that I love. But these things are slick bottom and pointed on the toe. So I'm fucking falling trying to stop these things.
Right.
And you're trying to get seamless with a part of your instrument, but you end up just trying to finagling the basic utility. And it's such a distraction. And then you watch someone like Prince, who, when Prince is opening for Rick James, he's coming out in pretty much a thong and heels and dancing like that, playing like that, totally unencumbered by the utility of the shoe. And it's such a mindfuck because it's like, where could he have been practicing that? Yeah, exactly. And people just need to find, he's my icon in terms of the freedom, the absolute freedom to whatever you could ever imagine, making it happen. And he goes from the sauciest 18-year-old you've ever seen, that is the sex symbol that the world never knew could exist, and the essence of androgyny, to being a buttoned-up Jehovah's Witness who still plays mad funk in a relatively short time frame of 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
How do you aspire to reach that kind of freedom?
I really am going through something right now where I have been trying to venture back out more into singing. And for years, I think because I kind of hid behind my instrument, even though there was joy in it, I kind of hid behind piano. So in years to come, I definitely want to be someone that is a singer who plays and can shred on keys. And as I grow in my voice and allow myself to feel free in my voice, that can also spill into the business aspect of it. Because I know, like, I want to continue to develop my company and be behind cameras, be in front of cameras, really just envelop as much of my creative field as possible the older that I get and the wiser that I get.
Yeah. I think you have a very different talent and ability and intention, where the right place to end up is something like I'm spacing his name for some reason. Hold on, give me a second. This will click at the dumbest moment. Who's the gentleman who wrote most of the Motown hits?
Berry Gordy?
Not
No,
Barry. Still touring. Before Curtis, the greatest falsetto the world had ever heard. God damn it.
Wait.
My parents just saw him.
Smokey Robinson?
Yeah, Smokey Robinson. I see you being in that kind of facility of you can write for male and female voices because you grew up singing all of these songs. Like, that's where I'd imagine that Prince's soaring falsetto comes from, is hearing and replicating without caring who started that. I'm gonna take it. I'm going here with it, and we're gonna make this happen.
Yeah.
So your artistic spectrum is so wide that you will almost need a roster of players and voices and facility to voice all that out in a lifetime. And it's part of the mission to put as much of it out in the real world that it can live its own life,
Yeah, and explore it without censoring it.
Yeah.
That's what this next album is really about. Saying what I want to say in is the best way as possible, but this next album has been a really emotional experience because a lot of things have just kind of fallen away and drifted and changed. And so I had this vision of really opening up my throat chakra and just letting loose on a microphone and saying everything that I need to say and leaving what's in the past in the past. And so I really want to explore that sort of catharsis and letting go
Yeah.
artistically, you know?
And there's something about the literal voice that differs from your musical on piano voice that people can comprehend. Like, whenever you lend yourself to someone else's track, it is filled with your musical voice. You know, there's no way to take someone's thumbprint off of what they do, because it's who they are.
Part of
That's
them,
it's different between us and the computer that's going to generate a drummer named Kyle on Logic. You know, as much as I love Logic Kyle, he's not a real fucking dude. You know?
Sorry, Kyle.
Sorry, Kyle. No, we can talk mad shit until the AI becomes sentient, and then we need to back up, because Siri's gonna remember all the times that you called her the C word. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But I can just envision the way that, you know, almost like the piano and a microphone tour that I'm so fond of with Prince. For you to walk up to a baby grand in a microphone, the story you could tell and the things that you can emote from people is so different than what you in a band or with the band could do. And there's not many people that have that facility of full spectrum creative ability the way that someone like you do with your skill set.
Yeah. And it's like, I really want to eventually hone in on being able to play and sing, and because there's a lot of mechanics that go along with that I'm still learning, which is why I'm also trying to just like step out of my comfort zone and just step into that leadership role as like a band leader. But yeah, that I love just when people can just tell a story through music and the immersive experience that holds. I eventually want to, again, like we're saying, like who I want to be, you know, as I'm growing as an artist and as a person, I want to be able to do that and give that to people.
Yeah. Well, and for someone that's done such exquisite harmony work over the years, I mean, in many bands, you've played whatever voice was needed for those things. And as someone that really enjoys that myself, sometimes, you know, I think with any band, when you look at the professional background singers that are back there swaying, doing the fucking thing, those people would sing circles around the guy in front, but they're serving the music in that. And so for someone that's seen you do all these things where you carve your way through these really impressive moments of voice leading and opening up ranges that aren't accessible to the melody itself, it's nice to pull all that back, and not just as an MD, just as someone that's sitting in a piano bar and giving you the God's honest truth, you know? Have you considered booking a solo gig in that regard? And like, what do you think is the right amount of time for you to step up and do your best but not feel overstretched?
As in just solo, or...
Yeah, if you were going to walk up to a piano and a microphone right now, how much time would you want to play for folks?
I mean, I will be at Ghost Baby opening for Hunter. Actually, I'll be there before then. I will be there on the 24th. So I will be doing another solo show at Ghost Baby, which I'm really excited for.
That's sensational. Is that number 4 or 5 of the solo shows?
Actually, yes, probably the 4th one. Yeah. And then I'm also opening for Hunter before I play in her band that same night.
Which is, I think, the best opportunity for someone like yourself, where you can serve as the utility in someone's band that may have a little bit more of a catalog to sell to venues, while also being this totally different and more vibrant thing on your own.
Yeah, yeah. And I pride myself on trying to find music and originals and ways of singing and playing on my own that just feel good, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like there's no other lyrical way of putting it than just making sure that I'm in a comfortable space on stage, because then if I'm in a comfortable space, then you're in a comfortable space.
Yeah. Well, there's something so weird about once you're back, like once you're past, I'm playing the chords and I'm singing the notes and I know the lyrics and here comes the chorus, and something just feels like, oh, I want to go there, and you can. It's like that's the ecstasy we all chase in any substances in life. You know, that is the purest form of joy, to feel yourself on the ledge, but knowing how far you can go out there. and also for them to never know your ceiling as an audience. There's something really difficult about crafting your show so that it continually goes up a step, up a step, up a step. And we never recess unless it's intentional. Like sometimes it shoots and ladders and you want to take them back down to the basis of this. But to feel like you can hit minute 44 of a 45-minute set and you say, we could have been on floor 15 this whole fucking time, you know?
Yep.
It's like, that's magic.
And one thing that I really appreciate about you is your showmanship. Like every time that I watch you or I'm on stage with you, I'm just like, he really gives his all. Like I was literally watching, Prince a couple weeks ago, and I was just like, I can totally get why that's his like muse or like his idol, because there's so much like between you doing like the James Brown footwork and just really getting into it, and also doing really great job of like crowd work. Like I really look up to you in that regard,
Thank you.
How do you really consider that on stage when you're performing? Is it natural for you?
I think the first time I felt like I was finding out something about myself that I didn't know was when I started dancing, and it was never intentional to copy James or anyone that I loved in that regard. It was just like, what was my body asking me to do? And it's gotten more comfortable in that over time. But when I watch someone like the Master Prince, he seems so cool, calm, and collected as he does all of it, versus in my heart of hearts, I know that I'm frantic and I'm gasping for breath and I'm going for that. But the only way I can get close to my hero right now is by going for 110. And if we hit minute 30 of an hour and a half show and I can't keep going, sucks to suck. You're going to learn today, and this is a workout. And you just got to go through that thing. But, the way that you talked about childhood whimsicalness, we all get pushback on who we are as we grow. Because as a young person, when you can't fully articulate who you are, and I don't think at any point you need to articulate all of who you are, but as you try to express that to people, the moment you veer off, they try to put you back in your lane. And I felt very quieted as a kid. I felt very put away for boisterous moments and ashamed of that loud side of myself and kind of this eccentric character that couldn't shut their mouth. And now, at a point in my career where I need to find out what I want to be, I'm going back to all these things that I was told not to do. And I'm trying to figure out how they turn into crowd work and a live show. And some of it's clunky. I think the funniest thing that I have in my life is a horrible stutter. If I try to think of what I'm going to say and then say it, I am bound to fuck up. So the only way I can say it is by not thinking about it and just getting way too far in for me to reel back at any point. Right. And we'll see. And then thank God for a talented band where it's like, I need a second to gather myself and figure out what's going on. Kick it to Chris. Kick it to Jason. Let Jamarco do the thing. Let yourself do the thing. Where when you surround yourself with people that really, what I'm most thankful for is I feel loved by every member of my band in a very, very wholesome way. Everyone's willing to give me feedback that's tough and productive. Everyone's willing to cut me a break when it seems like I've tried and I failed. And on days where I've done exactly what I needed to and more, people let me know that they're proud of me and make me feel affirmed in that. And as I look around at this musical community that you and I both participate in, I am most grateful to find myself reciprocated by musicians I love, Yeah. Within doing that and finding out this MD role as a supportive member of a band, what do you kind of admire in folks that do that, and what do you want your type of setting to be?
Wait, so I'm sorry, can you ask that again?
What do you want to portray as an MD? What do you think is most productive for this person that's steering the train? How does that job get done well?
I think the willingness to, like I said earlier, just listen, and also the ability to try new things, and also get your feet wet, get a few scars, and also take notes. I think one of the great things about being a good leader just in general is they can take different elements from different places. And a lot of people, even though they may look confident on the surface, they're really just learning on the job and trying to do the best that they can. So allowing your talent to shine through, listening to others, including other people in the conversation, both musically and in terms of like the ethics and the work environment. That's something, and also just being a really good listener, because that listening also helps the music listening. And then when you have a good relationship with those on tour or those that you're working with, and that side is good, then the music, when it's portrayed to the people, is going to look good.
Yeah. I think that's really well put. And I think I feel the same thing about like, again, when you try to anticipate what you're going to do or what you're going to say and you get out of the moment, you are a step removed from what actually needs to happen. And it could be exactly what you're thinking was right. But if you've been stocked and ready to pull the trigger on this thing for the last 5 minutes, it's not going to have the full, awesomeness that it could if you wait till it's time to call it and you call it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's part of the jargon that you get from musical education where you can call people into sections with a level of fluency that makes them comfortable.
Yeah.
And I never really got schooled in that necessarily, but I watched the guys who are unschooled but still really good at it, like Nick Heffron. And you try to take notes and learn the cues. And then when I started reflecting on my heroes like James and Prince and Sly, like the funk has this really honest aspect where it's like, say it on the mic. These people can know what the party trick is going to be, but when it's tight, it's great. Mm-hmm. And for a bunch of guys with headphones in on stage, it's kind of hard to get a point across without turning around and yelling and giving a hand symbol. It's like they might as well hear it, just have some fun with saying it, and hopefully the point gets across.
Yeah.
Nick had told me something funny about one of his church gigs where it's like they have a whole different bag of language that the MD is using. Like, do you find that in every band they have different ways of cueing things? And
I don't know. I feel like ever since I was a church musician as a kid, a lot of people kind of end up going to the same, hand signals, I like to call them traffic signals.
Yeah.
And
walk us through a couple. So like you repeat, take it to the top.
Yeah, take it to the top, take it out. Usually verses are like this, but I realized that now in the jazz community, that's like 2 sharps and then 2 flats is like down.
Oh, interesting.
So that's one discrepancy that's funny.
So when you say 2 sharps, 2 flats, wouldn't that just happen at the top of the song when you're talking key?
Yeah.
And so they're calling keys by sharps and flats. Mm-hmm. That's brutal, man.
Yeah.
Like my favorite for key is someone going like this and the guy being like, F, and someone's like, F? And it's like D minor. It's like, especially as a guitar player, I always got the key wrong. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I think it's just like, it's the first chord syndrome where it's like, it's in G. It's like, you're capo 4. That'd be a B, and that's still not the key.
I was about to say capos. Yeah, that has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah, capos are such a hilarious handicap. Like, think about it. If you walked up on a keyboard player, and I'm sure there are some people doing this well enough that people don't know, if they're just like -4, still playing out of C, +5.
When I really need help on a certain, show or something, and especially on like, Blue Water Kings gigs, like
yes.
We do those all the time. If we're just going, and I know the song in the original key, but we were in some other key that's really easy, I'm just like, -1. All right. Do.
But what a brilliant explanation of that, where whenever I'm changing keys for the sake of my own vocal comfort, which can be selfish, like Nick Heffron is, again, this maniac that wants to do everything in the original key. I don't fly like that. I'll sound like shit 3 songs in if we do that. I'm taking us down 2 whole steps if need be, just merciless. But defining everything as the distance from the original is so much more concise than what I think the key is. Mm-hmm. And I've been in this place where, as I list these things, if I don't know it's the original, I'm going to put the original next to it, even though so if I fuck up the key, people still know, like, no, we're doing it as is.
Right.
Or we're doing it a whole step down or a whole step up. Mm-hmm. That's so much more concise. And you just gave me a dummy aha moment.
Yeah, because I know I learn things by ear. Like, I learned sheet music as a child, but still to this day, like I can probably read it, but it will not be fast. I did a show with the Cincinnati jazz people at one point. Well, it wasn't the whole orchestra, but it was handled by CSO, and I was like, I'm so sorry, y'all. And on top of that, it was like this big bass player, and I was like, no, I don't want to look like this right now.
Well, and the piano is so unforgiving in that regard. I'd imagine also the horn instruments are, where it's like a half step really feels different. Versus guitar players just move it up, bass players just move it up. Worst case scenario, you lose your fat open strings. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you want a low B flat? Well, fuck you. You know, like it's not going to happen. For me personally, if I don't have those open strings to kind of dabble in between notes, it feels like a handicap to some extent. So as a kid, did you get the advice of learn something and then learn in every single other key?
That really more so came in college, because I think, especially with jazz charts and singers, you have to be able to, especially if you're playing on an acoustic instrument, you need to be able to transpose on the fly in your mind. But I've always been that person where it's like I can try to transpose just because, again, I learn by ear, but I'm sorry, I'm still just going to use a button.
And I think if there's a technological advantage to staying comfortable for the sake of performance at its best every time, no questions asked. But just for the sake of learning the ins and the outs of the instrument, like I don't understand which keys feel better on a piano because I've never experienced that medium. But I think Jamarca was joking to me about something the other day where it's like, if a band is jamming in church in E and we hit the back end of that and we want to take it there, we're going down a half step. You know, it's like, I'm just going to call for it and we're going to get really comfy here.
Yeah.
And that type of subtle modulation just opens up the hands to do so much more.
Absolutely.
So what are the keys that most piano players really prefer? And why?
Well, C, E flat, F, B flat, for me A flat, and I think that's just because blues scale possibly in the back of the mind, just off the top of my head.
Yeah, but as you're looking at piano, I'd always imagine that as you play the sharps and flats, everything gets more condensed underhand, but it seems like there's a preference for using keys with sharps and flats. It's like,
yeah, and also you have like major and minor, because some songs in certain keys, if it's a minor key, it's going to feel weird. Some songs, if it's a major key in a certain key, it's going to feel weird, because B is one of those keys where it's like it just feels weird no matter what it is.
Yeah.
And then
B?
Yeah, just be natural.
God damn, I have so many songs of Be Natural.
It's Stevie Wonder, all the great, because this is the thing that I can't stand with B and A flat. All the songs sound so beautiful. I was playing, just because I do these things where sometimes I just put my iTunes on shuffle and I'll just play along to it in my contact, my keyboard and my computer. It was the most beautiful song that I love, but it was in like B minor, and I'm like, this key is so gorgeous. Why is it so hard to play in? You have like every time I play a B minor, like what is it, 7? I'm always just crunchy gang sign hands. I'm like, no.
Gang sign hands is a great way to put some gross tight chords on a piano. That's fucking hilarious. Man, I'm still such a beginner on that instrument, and it's really magnificent the way that certain songs just feel so much better between one or the other. Like I'll try to play a Billy Joel song on an acoustic gig, and it turns out it sounds like garbage on a guitar. It's like Vienna. It's like that G minor to B flat right at the top just doesn't have the weight and the prominence and the demandingness that it does on a piano. Yeah. And then you sit down and you look at that exact move on a piano and you're like, oh, that's just so much better.
Yeah. I was about to say, do you ever feel like when you're playing guitar that you're limited by the voicings that your fingers can do and on the strings?
Well, because I only know what I know, as much as I'm stuck in some routines, I feel I'm starting to feel much more free about the voicings, especially. One thing that a lot of young guitar players get recommended is something called the cage system. And I'm not too familiar with this, but my best understanding of it is there's what you would call cowboy chords, first position chords that are the first things you learn. So your first position, C, G, A, E, and D. As you move up the neck, those shapes are going to become all of the 12 notes that you're going to need in the 12 chords. So you pretty much just learn the shape and how it relates to the chord's value. And since I never learned that as a kid, I'm now realizing it's these, what's the word I wanted to use there? It's landing places for certain licks and movements and whatnot. So, if you're playing something out of D, that D chord, as it progresses into your G shapes up the neck, that once you get to the 10th fret, everything's going to feel like your G in second position or your F. You can start to get wild with these things that you never realized applied to this key. Yeah. Versus when I see someone on piano, again, like the having to rethink every aspect of where you can land is such a mind fuck. And maybe that's why the musical education on that instrument is a little hardier. It's a little more like the wheat bread of the game versus I'm playing on something bleached,
Right. That's hilarious. I never thought about it that way.
Have you ever thought about doing like a looper style show, almost similar to what you can do in the studio, so you can add your drums and your bass and your horns?
All the time. I always point to Kimbra for that because she uses a Chaosilator live, and she also uses loopers live. And so I said, hopefully, when I get to the space where I just have because I'm doing a show on September 24th, which I'm calling it my big show, even though it's still just an opener spot. But
September 24th, what day of the week is that?
It should be a Thursday. Yeah, because I'm playing with Lauren Elise that Saturday, so it's a Thursday.
Cool.
And I have Jenna Real on keys and Nick Meehan on drums, and I have Monica Murosi. She's on synth bass. Ideally,
Is it 21st? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, 21st. Cool. My bad. And so ideally, when I get to this point that I want to be in as a performer, I want to have like looper, weird mic effects. Because Monica, who's Muasi, you should look her up. She's an amazing musician.
Yeah.
She also has
play together, correct?
She has a little effects board that she'll use on her mic. I want to have that, a looper, and then just like a little synth something, or like a dual keyboard situation, and just sing and then go and then sing effects.
I think you would have such a different mastery of that because of the way that you think about layers in production, like the amount of back catalog that you've worked with for that. What time is a late show at Ghost Baby?
It's 6 to 7:45. It's an early one.
Fuck.
Yeah.
I'll be playing Keystone.
That's the thing that happens in this community, because a lot of my friends, we've been talking about this lately. We're at a space where we want to I think we're always in this space where we want to support everybody, but we're all doing things at the exact same time.
Yeah.
It's wild.
Well, there's something really important going on in the city, and maybe it's just my perspective that's going on, or maybe it's my dream that it will go on, but you have to look at the amount of finances that are circulating in the scene between the clubs, the listeners, the musicians. And we only get better if the GDP, if the whole market grows, because with limited resources, we can only do so much.
Yeah.
So if everyone only makes the bare minimum on their weekend gigs, there's no way that you can take next week off to go see a show.
Right.
And when you go see a show, you re-inject that resource back into this scene so that you can take something from it emotionally, from the musical perspective, but you're also enabling that money to move on and do the next thing. And it's very difficult to gauge that fine line between getting ahead and making the most, because it's still an underappreciated part of our lives. And I don't want to say it's getting less and less appreciated over time. I think things like Spotify and YouTube and wherever you like to stream are a great companion for life, and they allow you to soundtrack your day-to-day better than anything else ever has. But if it gets listeners farther away from going to their local clubs and taking part of their own scene, and in the way that Nashville and LA and other strong markets take pride in their locals. They have ownership from an early stage, and they want to see positive growth. Right now, Cincinnati can be blissfully unaware that there are locals in this scene trying to bring something home to their market that's valuable, and we as artists between each other have to be a shining example of why that's important. I think that's a lot of the reason why this show is important to me, to tell people, listen the fuck up. Dev Marvelous has a show on September 21st. Like, I understand that I'm gonna be begging you to come to one of my shows too, but I hope you choose well for what you need right now, because none of us can be the one and only answer for listeners. But together we can be the kind of diversity and musical enrichment that honestly makes the city special for that.
Yeah. How do you feel about, because I know you just did your family cookout
Yes.
thing. Me and Sam were actually talking about doing something similar to that, where it's like we just have all of this, like I like to call it the group chat, where all of my like Cincinnati people and their Cincinnati people, we just kind of come together and just do one big ass festival.
Yeah.
Is that very much like shit in the same pot and like all of that, or how do you feel about situations like that where it's like everybody comes together in the same space?
Yeah.
Is it too packed?
I don't think so, but I think there's a lot of reinventing of the wheel that goes on during that type of project. The things I felt most encumbered by, like, how am I going to get this done, is how am I going to pay everybody, and where am I going to get the facility for this? In most venues that I reached out to last year when I wanted to do the first year of the festival, I was going to be renting the venue, I was going to be paying the bands, I was going to be finding the sponsors. There was literally no relief from a team to get this kind of thing done. And it was going to cost my life savings to make happen. And I had to put my hands up and just say, like, I can't make this happen right now. And then my dream situation came about because I was willing to admit when something wasn't going to work, and let go of it and kind of surrender to the actual reality of what's going on here. And now I get to have it in my hometown on stages that I'm fond of, with the financial backing of a municipality that's very considerate and caring and has wonderful residents. And the only thing they wanted to do was entertain people. So I was so thrilled by that then I can make my dream into at least half of what it can be in reality. And hopefully next year it grows from that.
I was about to say, who's to say it doesn't like you expand from that too?
Totally. And if you want to see your dreams in reality, don't expect for it to take anything less than a decade most of the time. So first year is behind us. I learned a ton, and the overall attendance I would put in the category of garbage. But every single one of those people that showed up have my heart and soul, and they mean so much to me for that. Because you can beg people to show up, and they won't. But when someone feels like the value being offered is something they want to take part in, then it's a win-win. And that's a tough thing to come to. But I would recommend for people that feel like there's a musical community that needs to have a day of a semblance and expression and joy. It's like, lean on the utilities that already are here for artists and appreciate that kind of thing. Because you can't teach people to enjoy it necessarily. You can't force them to. You can only shine your own example of that.
Yeah, totally.
When you look at this group chat, do you see this as like your main home market or just a small chapter of it?
I honestly just see it as just like my community, and as I grow and get older, it'll just expand. If ever I move, then more people will be added to the group chat, because I'm that person where it's like, when I get big, I want y'all to have a piece of what I've got. So when like we're having something, and say I have some type of like event, like if I move out to New York or someplace, I want to be able to still communicate with my buddies from the Cincinnati and be like, hey, I've got this over here. Can I, like, even if it's just through freaking Zoom or something, just still keeping that channel open and keeping people in the loop, because we do amazing work together.
Yeah.
And then when I'm in my sort of like new place element and still expanding, that can only grow. And so it's like, eventually these people will be linked to these people. And I'm a huge fan of the producer Alan Carr. He was the person that produced Grease and a bunch of other sort of vehicles in the 1970s, and he worked with Robert Stigwood at Paramount for all this stuff. And he was known for throwing these elaborate parties, and he was a big advocate for being somebody that brought the new school and the old school and a little bit of like the avant-garde into the same place.
Cool.
So you have people like Jane Russell and Carol Channing with like leather bike dudes from like the gay underground club circuit, and then you would also have like Diane Cannon and Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta and all these people in the same house party. And it would just be like, that's kind of what I want to do with my music community and my artistic community. Like the more I expand, the more I can, you know, branch out to like the elders in my community, my friends on my level in my generation that are on my community, and also give to people who haven't really been discovered yet, and make it all one big sort of family universe. It's very kumbaya-ish. I know that's a controversial term now, but
Really?
that's the only way I could. Yeah, there was a whole Instagram post
Gotta
about
to cover up my tramp stamp.
right. But it's such a it feels very much like I want to teach the world to sing. Very that I want to give the world a Coke type of situation. But I think that it's still very possible that, especially through art, which in music, which is one of the top languages that anyone can speak, even instrumentally, it would be such an amazing image to have so many people from so many different places, even the smallest of places, come together. You know?
Yeah, but when you make the groups and events and you try to bring people together, there's always the possibility, and maybe the assured nature is that you're going to have folks that aren't positive for the community. They take more than they give, or maybe they just take. And it's hard to weed those types of behaviors out in a way that feels like it sustains well. Like if you let it go on too long, it's time to hit kablooey and let this thing go. And there's many bands that fall apart that way. And, you know, in the way that you're talking about, like Olivia Newton-John and the biker gang, it's like the many ways that flowers can proliferate in front of you and be something beautiful. But at the base, if it's an invasive species and it kills the other flowers around it, then you need to be able to know that early enough to pull that bitch out and let it grow somewhere else. And it's so odd when your judgment call on a person and your friend's judgment call on a person contradict. So now you need to put up a barrier between you, that friend, and this person in order to protect your own garden.
Yeah.
How do you kind of work between those social situations?
I think just overall, what I try to do when it comes to, you know, conflicting energies and people and places and things, first of all, like, we're all going to be living and learning. So that's one thing. You kind of have to embrace the fact that not every single chemical equation is going to make a nice cocktail. Sometimes it's going to go boom, and you just have to be like, okay, well, that went boom. Let me just go clean up, because I think at the end of the day, it would be better to learn from having an experience such as that rather than just being like, well, I guess I'll just stay in my corner with my people and not really branch out. But in terms of dealing with how I cope with certain situations where it's like conflicting forces, I think, yeah, it's just kind of like listening and learning. And then you make changes from that. And you don't really mean any harm when you bring people together in the same space. But it's kind of like how I was doing this. Okay, it's funny that you were talking about TikTok earlier, because I was doing this Met Gala filter where a lot of celebrities are sitting at the same table, and instantly I was like, oh, this celebrity's cool, I like them. And then I realized it was Nicki Minaj and Cardi B, and I had them at the same table, and I was like, oh no.
Yes, baby. Oh my.
Not the shoe being thrown at the Met Gala.
Oh my God. And those are not going to be soft shoes to throw.
Right.
I mean, at that level of style, you're talking about a borderline weapon on your foot.
Exactly. Like I remember that almost like it was yesterday. The internet went crazy after Cardi. I forgot what red carpet event it was. It was like Cardi B threw a shoe at Nicki Minaj or something. It was so wild. But situations like that, it's like, I don't know. I'm that person where it's like, and maybe it's just like the Libra. I just want everybody to be happy in me, but I'm that person where it's just like I want to at least get to know somebody for me, and if the goodness that I see in you, someone else can see in you, then that would be even better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I get when people can't really come together because that's happened with me. Like, there's some people where I just have to stay away from them.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's because someone has too similar personality type. You feel like they're taking your place. And that's something that like slowly as I'm trying to mature myself into a better person, I find myself really embracing those folks. And this program has helped me a lot in that, with wanting to sit down and ask these people and to be two different things that I can see. I can see how we can have a Venn diagram that has a very happy middle and then exist in our own world outside of that. And I also get trying to learn the maturity of sit in the room with people that you disagree with or maybe have preconceived notions that are negative, and still fill your cup from the other parts of the room, to not let them rob you of the joys that you want to have. But it's just difficult when you feel like you're reading a red flag and you almost want to be. Maybe this is part of the cancel culture that we live in, of just like some people find it's their job to look for the red flag and announce it to the room. That is their place, and that's a very tough. You're the executioner. You don't get to be a very positive thing in that. And I think we all have the temptation to try to eradicate people we don't agree with. But I think more of what you allude to and what I just mentioned, like learn to sit happily in the room with them and to still find your own joy in it is a very important part of this.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I was thinking about with, the whole Me Too movement, which I'm all for that movement, and like cancel culture kind of has its pluses and its drawbacks, but I think the thing that I think of when that whole movement kind of was getting off the ground, there would be a lot of moments when I would look in the news and see somebody was convicted of something, and it was like, but not to take away from the fact that they felt some type of way, but it was one of those situations where it was like, did this really need to get blown out of proportion, like publicly? Like, we could have had a conversation and you told me that this made you uncomfortable rather than now I'm in public exile.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think that whole inviting the people to the table and just sitting with them and getting to know them, and also stating your boundaries and what made you feel some type of way, I would rather do that than just completely just cut people out of the conversation completely. Yeah,
I think that's very well put. One of the most formative books in my young adult life was one of the Yoga Sutras called the Yamas and the Niyamas. And it's very similar to like the Christian Beatitudes. And, I, as a kid that came from that lens, it's always going to be what I compare things to. But the first two chapters, I had to read 8 to 10 times before I can move on with the rest of the book, because I never realized how hard the paradox is between truthfulness and nonviolence. And there's so many days where they're doing this, and you need to find out which one of these actually has place in your life and has need. Like you said, like sometimes it doesn't need to be a violent experience to be truthful. But there's a lot of times in life where, say, something that your friend needs to hear, but it's going to break their fucking heart to tell them. You need to find right setting to tell them that, and there's both these elements to always be considered that are so difficult to walk the line of. And when someone finds themselves to be a violent executioner of truth, and that is their whole being, then they must turn to the non-violent, untruthful side and try to balance this out again. Because anytime that you're living a life where you are strictly an aggressor, tends to become something painful in your own heart over time,
Yeah. I just personally find that, because that's another thing that I'm going through on this record, is like going through that whole situation of like, so-and-so did me wrong and they made me feel this way. And so part of me wants to like come at them in this music. And I realized that I was actually having a conversation about this with Lauren Elise, and she told me that the more you try to censor how you feel in the music, it's just gonna make it not a good experience. That doesn't mean that you have to release this bash track of like you screaming into a microphone like you did this to me.
Doesn't need to be you and Eminem, Mariah Carey, you
right,
know?
right. Literally like Roman's revenge, but like Marvel's revenge. But I think the more you allow yourself to go through those emotions, even in private, that then allows you to be a greater person, and then also make space to have certain conversations and invite people into the fold and be that sort of like good person that's not tearing people's heads off, you know?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'm being a hypocrite because you and I have this medium that we can be so honest and so violent with and so fucking unfiltered. They don't realize the magnitude if that stuff goes out in the world, what it does to people.
Yeah.
But if you stop to consider it through that lens in the process, you miss the art. You miss the cathartic feeling of, I needed to say this to understand this.
Yeah.
There's so many lyrics in my life that seem like rubbish and just bullshit. And looking back, it's like, finally I could tell myself the truth about this. And I didn't even know that was the truth until I could look at it from an objective distance.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally feel that.
Yeah. Well, as we start to wrap this up, is there anything that you'd like to promote? Anything that you'd like to make the people aware of?
Well, the new mini album before the big album is coming out October 13th. That's Friday the 13th. Woo! But it's Devon 2, and the subtitle is Wanderlust. And it's just an album of instrumentals, just like Devon 1 was, that was released last year in October for my birthday. And the first single will be dropping on September 12th. So look for that. And then also, like I said, September 21st, reserve your tables at Ghost Baby for the big show. Again, we have Jenna Reel on second keys, Nick Meehan on drums, and Monica Ruosi on synth bass. So I hope to see you guys there.
What a keyboard-filled show. That sounds so rad.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be funky.
As much as I try to tell you, Dev, I think you are one of the most amazing blessings in our city musically. And as a friend, I treasure our time together and all the things you brought in my life, brother.
Thank you, friend.
Love you, man.
Love you.
All right, peace, motherfuckers. Ooh!